Okay, welcome back. So today we're going to be starting chapter 3 in part 2 of Joseph Campbell's Primitive Mythology. Part 2 is entitled The Mythology of the Primitive Planters. Chapter 3 is entitled The Culture Province of the High Civilizations. One of the most interesting of the many recent developments in the field of archaeological research has been the steady progress of the excavations in the Near East, which now are bringing into focus the centers of origin and path of diffusion of the earliest Neolithic culture forms. To introduce the main results of the work pertinent to our present theme, it may be noted first that the arts of grain agriculture and stock breeding, which are the basic forms of economy supporting the high civilizations of the world, now seem to have made their first appearance in the Near East somewhere between 7500 and 4500 BC, and to have spread eastward and westward from this center in a broad band, displacing the earlier, much more precariously supported hunting and food collecting cultures, until both the Pacific coast of Asia and the Atlantic coasts of Europe and Africa were attained by about 2500 BC. Meanwhile, in the nuclear zone, from which this diffusion oriented, a further development took place circa 3500 to 2500 BC, which yielded all the basic elements of the archaic high civilizations: writing, the wheel, mathematics, the calendar, kingship, priestcraft, the symbolism of the temple, taxation, etc. The mythological themes specific to this second development were then diffused comparatively rapidly, together with the technological effects, along the ways already blazed, until once again the coasts of the Pacific and the Atlantic were attained. 1. The Proto-Neolithic, circa 7500 to 5500 BC. The first phase of this crucial transformation of society appears to be represented by a series of discoveries made in the middle 1920s by Dorothy Garrod at the so-called Mount Carmel Caves in Palestine. Artifacts similar to those she found have since been discovered as far south as Helwan, Egypt, as far north as Beirut and Yabrud, and as far east as the Kurdish hills of Iraq. The industry is known to archaeology as the Natufian, and may have flourished anywhere from the 8th to the 5th millenniums BC. The dating is still extremely obscure. We may term its vaguely defined era the Proto-Neolithic, and its stage of development terminal food gathering. The materials suggest congeries of nomadic or semi-nomadic hunting tribes, with a rich variety of flint and bone implements of a late Paleo-microlithic type, not yet dwelling in villages, yet supplementing their food supply with some variety of grain-like grass. For sickle blades made of stone have been found among the remains, and these suggest a harvest. Numerous bones of the pig, goat, sheep, ox, and of an equid of some sort let us know, furthermore, that if the Natufians were not yet domesticating, they were nevertheless slaughtering the same beasts that would later constitute the basic barnyard stock of all the higher cultures. Their style of life was transitional, between the stages of food collecting and cultivation. The real crux of the archaeological problem of the origin of the basic arts of the food cultivators, however, rests in the question, still unanswered, as to whether such Near Eastern remains actually represent the first steps towards agriculture and stock breeding taken anywhere in the world, or may not rather represent merely an area of peripheral acculturation, the superficial adoption by nomadic hunters of ideas and elements derived from somewhere else. A According to a view that has been gaining force in recent decades, the latter is the more likely case. The first plantings should be sought, according to this conjecture, in that broad equatorial zone where the vegetable world has supplied not only the food, clothing, and shelter of man since time out of mind, but also his model of the wonder of life, in its cycle of growth and decay, blossom and seed, wherein death and life appear as transformations of a single, superordinated, indestructible force. Today we find throughout this immense area a well-developed style of village life based on a garden economy of yams, coconuts, bananas, taro, etc., as well as a characteristic cultural assemblage including rectangular gabled huts, drums made of split logs, and a way of communicating by drum beats. A galaxy of distinctive musical instruments, secret societies of a particular kind, tattooing, a type of bow, and feathered arrow, such forms of burial and skull cult as have just been described for South or East Africa, bird, snake, and crocodile worship, spirit posts and huts, particular methods of making fire, and a way of fashioning cloth of palm fiber and of bark. Add to these an elaborate ritual lore culminating in communal rites of animal and human sacrifice, a mythology of the journey to the land of the dead in many particulars resembling that of the Moleculan guardian of the labyrinth, an astonishing community of folklore motifs, and the spread of a single linguistic complex, the Malayo-Polynesian, from Madagascar off the coast of Southeast Africa to Easter Island, and you have a considerable base from which to argue for a common sphere. Furthermore, when it is observed, and this point is of particular moment, that it was just beyond the eastern finger of this sphere that a highly developed system of agriculture appeared in Peru and Middle America, based largely on maize, but including also some 50-odd other crops, and associated with the breeding of llamas and alpacas in Peru and turkeys in Mexico. Whereas midway in the same vast zone, the Southeast Asian neighborhood of Indochina and Indonesia, rice agriculture, the soybean, the water buffalo, and domestic fowl first appear, it cannot be surprising that a number of scholars have developed the concept of a single cultural realm out of which, or in association with which, three major matrices of grain agriculture matured, namely Southeast Asia, rice, the Near East, wheat and barley, and Peru and Middle America, maize. The archaeologists spading up the Near East, stage by stage, however, tend to believe that they are fathoming there the ultimate reach of the problem of the origins of the Neolithic village, at least for the Afro-Eurasian hemisphere. In their view, the Southeast Asian complex would represent then the local adaptation of a system of arts carried thither by diffusion. And comparably, many of those now exploring the origins of the high civilizations of Peru and Middle America believe that these too developed independently of the primitive gardening complex of the Madagascar to Easter Island axis. The question is extremely complex and for some reason tends to involve scholars emotionally. I return to it in the following chapters and meanwhile focus attention on a brief reconstruction of the Near Eastern chapter of this intricate story. Thank you very much for joining me. Next time we'll continue with chapter 3 and we'll be reading the second section, the Basal Neolithic, circa 5500 to 4500 BC.